My name is Robert Hale. I'm 68 years old, and I live in a quiet house at the edge of Millbrook, Ohio, the same house where I raised my son, and where I later raised my grandson Tyler, after his parents couldn't. If you had told me a year ago that the boy I raised like my own would stand in my living room, smiling, telling people I was already as good as dead, I would have laughed. But that's exactly what happened, and by the time he realized what he'd done, it was already too late for him. This is the story of how my grandson tried to take everything I built, and how one signature, one quiet phone call, and one folder he never knew existed took it all back. Tyler came to live with me when he was 9. His mother, my daughter, passed when he was little, and his father wasn't in the picture. I didn't think twice. I moved his bed into the spare room the same week and told him this was his home now, for as long as he needed it. I taught him to fish on Saturday mornings. I sat through every school play, every basketball game, every parent-teacher conference. When he got his first paycheck at 16, he came home and hugged me so hard I almost fell over. He used to say, "Grandpa, when I make it big, I'm buying you a boat." I used to laugh and tell him I just wanted him to make it home safe every night. For years, it really did feel like we were a team. I built a small hardware business from nothing, Hale's Supply, and by the time Tyler turned 20, that business was worth more than either of us ever imagined. I told myself I was building it for him. Every late night at the store, every risk I took, it was all so he'd never have to struggle the way I did. The first change I noticed was small. Tyler stopped asking how the store was doing. He used to ask every week. Now, weeks would pass without a word about it. Then came the questions that felt off. "Grandpa, do you have a will? Grandpa, is the house in your name or both our names?" I brushed it off. He was 23. Young men think about the future, I told myself. But then his girlfriend Madison started coming around more. She was polite to my face, but I noticed the way she'd look around the house when she thought no one was watching, like she was pricing the furniture. One evening I heard her whisper to Tyler in the kitchen, "Once it's all yours, we won't have to wait." I told myself I misheard her. I wanted to believe I misheard her. It started with paperwork. Tyler began asking me to sign things, just routine forms for the store, he said. One night, exhausted after a long day, I almost signed a document without reading it carefully. Something told me to slow down. When I read it fully, my hands went cold. It was a power of attorney form, giving Tyler full control over my finances and my business, effective immediately. I asked him why he needed this. He smiled and said, "Grandpa, you're not getting any younger. I just want to make sure everything's protected for the family." Protected for the family. Not protected for me. I didn't sign it that night. I told him I needed time to think. His face changed for just a second, a flash of frustration he couldn't quite hide, before he smiled again and said, "Of course. No rush." But there was a rush. I found out later he had already been telling people around town that he was basically running Hale's Supply now. He'd told our accountant that I was starting to slow down mentally and that they should loop him in on all future decisions. None of it was true. But he was laying the groundwork, brick by brick, for a future where I didn't have a say anymore. I won't lie to you. That was the hardest month of my life. Harder than losing my daughter in some ways, because this was a different kind of loss. This was watching someone I raised, someone I loved without condition, quietly calculate how much of my life he could take for himself. I sat alone in the kitchen one night with the power of attorney papers still on the table, and I cried for the first time in years. Not because I was afraid of losing the business. I cried because I finally understood that the boy I raised didn't see me as his grandfather anymore. He saw me as an obstacle between him and a comfortable life. I thought about all the years, teaching him to fish, sitting up with him through fevers, driving 2 hours in the snow to watch him play a basketball game he barely got to play in. None of that mattered to him anymore. Or maybe it never mattered the way I thought it did. But somewhere in that grief, something else started to grow. Not anger exactly. Clarity. The next morning, I called an old friend, a lawyer named Gerald Whitfield, who'd known me for over 30 years. I told him everything. The power of attorney, the whispers from Madison, the rumors Tyler was spreading at the store. Gerald asked me one question that changed everything. "Robert, Does Tyler know about the second account? I'd almost forgotten about it myself. Years earlier, long before Tyler moved in, I had quietly restructured part of the business into a family trust, one that Tyler had no legal claim to unless very specific conditions were met. Conditions about honesty, about family unity, about protecting the people who built the business alongside me. Conditions Tyler had just spent the last few months violating without even knowing it existed. I also learned something else that day. Tyler and Madison had already met with a real estate agent without telling me to get an informal valuation of my house. They weren't planning for the future. They were planning for my absence. That was the moment the sadness turned into something steadier. Not rage, resolve. I didn't yell. I didn't confront him that night. I did something far more effective. I got quiet. Gerald and I spent the next 2 weeks reviewing every document Tyler had tried to get me to sign, every conversation he'd had behind my back, every promise he'd broken without realizing I'd find out. We built a case, not for a courtroom drama, but for something simpler, making sure the truth was undeniable, and making sure I never signed away control of anything I'd spent 40 years building. I let Tyler keep talking to the accountant. I let him keep telling people he was basically in charge. I even let him bring Madison to dinner one more time, and I watched them exchange a look across the table, a look that told me everything I needed to know about how sure they were that they'd already won. They had no idea I was documenting every conversation. No idea Gerald had already begun formally transferring full ownership of Hale's Supply into the family trust, permanently placing it outside Tyler's reach until, and only if, he proved himself capable of running it with honesty. No idea I had quietly changed the will months earlier, the same week I first felt something was wrong. The final piece came together on a Thursday afternoon. Gerald called to confirm the trust transfer was complete and legally binding. The house, the business, the accounts. None of it could be touched by a signature Tyler thought he was close to getting. Everything I built was finally protected, permanently, from anyone who saw it as something to inherit rather than something to earn. I planned one last family dinner. I told Tyler I wanted to talk about the future of the business, words I knew would bring him running with a pen in his pocket, ready to sign whatever I put in front of him. He showed up early. Madison came with him, dressed like she was already celebrating something. We sat at the same kitchen table where I'd raised him. I set a folder down in front of him, not the paperwork he was expecting, but copies of everything. The power of attorney form he'd tried to rush me into signing, notes from our accountant about the rumors he'd spread, the name of the real estate agent he and Madison had quietly contacted. I watched the color drain from his face as he realized I knew. "Grandpa, I can explain." "You don't have to," I told him. "I already understand." I explained calmly what he never knew, that the business had already been moved into a trust weeks earlier, that the house was protected the same way, that nothing he'd been planning for, nothing he and Madison had already been pricing out with a real estate agent, was ever going to be his to take. Madison stood up first, her face hard, and left without a word. Tyler sat frozen, staring at the folder like it might change if he looked at it long enough. "I'm not doing this to punish you," I told him. "I'm doing this because you stopped seeing me as your grandfather and started seeing me as an inheritance. And I needed you to understand. I'm still here. I'm still the one who decides what happens to what I built." He left that night without finishing his coffee. It's been several months now. He reached out once, a short message, apologizing, though I still don't know how much of it was genuine and how much was regret over what he lost. Hale's Supply is still standing, still mine, protected now for whoever proves they deserve it, not whoever assumes they're owed it. And every morning when I unlock those doors myself, I remember that the people who truly love you don't ask what they'll get when you're gone. They ask how you're doing today. If you're a grandparent, a parent, anyone who's ever wondered whether the people around you love you or just love what you have, trust that quiet feeling in your chest. It's usually right, and it's never too late to protect what you spent a lifetime building.